This is our seventh installment of the Proverbs class that is premiering every Wednesday night on our YouTube channel. And if you are watching this at home with your family, if you're watching this with some friends you've gathered with, or if you're watching this later on, we are glad that you are making the time for this. And if you're jumping right in the middle, go to our YouTube channel, Bel Air Church of Christ. Go to the playlist for Wednesday night Bible study, and you will find, if you go back to the beginning of September, I think it was, when we started this, all of the lessons there in order that we're doing, going through the book of Proverbs. And it is more of a thematic approach to the book of Proverbs. The book lends itself to that, I think. But instead of just going through the text bit by bit, we are talking about some of the main themes. And really, for the first part of the class up to this point, we've been looking at some of the big ideas of Proverbs. And then from this class on, we are looking at some of the more specific topics that the Proverbs address. But I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's jump into the material for Lesson 7. This is what we have been looking at, and we are talking today about our first specific topic, dealing with parents and children. And so I want to review a little bit some of the big ideas that we have talked about leading up to today, but let's just start by introducing our goals for this particular lesson. So we're talking about parents and children. There's a lot said in the Proverbs about parenting and about the relationship between father and son, mother and son or daughter, and we want to explain what it looks like for a child to gain wisdom and look at that process and what is involved in that, both on the side of the parents as well as the children. And what we want to demonstrate by the end of the study is that real maturity is shown by an eagerness to learn and a willingness to listen rather than being free from all of that. So it will tie into what we've been saying is our definition of wisdom, but we want to see that real wisdom for a child is to depend on learning and instruction rather than the opposite of that. But let's look at some things. This is a true or false quiz. So somehow, even in a recorded class, I managed to get a quiz in here. But take a minute to look at these. I say a minute, I maybe give you 30 seconds to look over these statements. And again, I'm just asking you true or false. We'll go over each of them in a second, but take a second to look over these statements. Okay, let's look at these one at a time. First one, the wise man realizes that the only source of wisdom is God's word. True or false? Well, that's actually false because of that small word only. Not to be too tricky here, but remember that the Proverbs is clear that the wise person sees wisdom from many sources, including God's word. And maybe in terms of priority, we would say that God's word is the ultimate, the most certain. Okay, but there are many sources of wisdom that can be drawn on. Okay, really the second one clarifies the first. All wisdom originates with God. That is true, of course. He is the ultimate source of all wisdom. Okay, but he has chosen to reveal that wisdom in various ways, including his word, of course. Reproof, the third statement here, reproof of a wise man is never necessary. I mean, why would you have to reprove him? He's a wise person. Well, of course, that's false. Being wise is more about how you respond to reproof than needing it in the first place. Okay. Fourth one, the wise man is known by his ready answer to every question. Remember, the wise person always says, in every circumstance, no, the wise person is the one known for listening and considering before he speaks. Okay. The fool is known by his stupid look and inability to express himself. Maybe that's how we would think of a fool, right? Bumbling, and they can't say anything, sensible. Remember in Proverbs that the fool is an expert at expressing himself. He delights only, remember the proverb says, in expressing his own opinion. That's what the fool does. He talks while the wise person listens. Riches and popularity are the primary rewards of wise living mentioned in Proverbs. Is that true or false? It's false. Again, maybe one word skews that one way or the other, but they are not the primary rewards, although they are talked about as byproducts of wise living. The Proverbs have much to say about a hope for a life after death. That's false. The Bible says quite a bit. The Proverbs doesn't say very much. It's focused more on, we might say, the here and now, and those benefits associated with living wisely. Maybe to that point, life and death in Proverbs often refer to a quality of life rather than actual living or dying. That is true. Again, often is a key word here. There are times when it seems pretty clear that the Proverbs writer is saying, you want to stay alive? Well, then don't run around with violent people. But most of the time, life and death is about the way a person lives, or the fullness, the quality of life, as opposed to simply staying alive. The Proverbs picture God as very distant from the hearts and affairs of men. That is false. And that counters what we said earlier. There's not a whole lot about heaven and hell, if anything, in Proverbs. But that doesn't mean that Proverbs ignores the presence of God and the knowledge of God in each of our circumstances. God is aware of everything we do and is even aware of the intents and hearts of men. Then the last one here, the real reward for wisdom is that we can live as much as possible in harmony with God and His creation. And that is true. That's really the picture Proverbs is painting. It's not about living a certain way so that I get stuff or good things for myself. It's about fearing the Lord, living within the knowledge and the fear of the Lord in a way that unifies me with Him now, so that my life can be as full as possible because I am connected to the source of life. And I am living in harmony, in a sense, with the way that He has ordered and structured the world through wisdom. And that's what the Proverbs is describing. Living well in the world is the goal of Proverbs. And so we'll remind you, based on our somewhat tricky, true or false, but they're tricky for a reason, if you found them tricky, because we want to make sure we are emphasizing properly what Proverbs is emphasizing. And the Proverbs speaks of wisdom as a commodity. It's something to be gained. And we can gain it from many sources, many ways, relationships, experience, nature, others' mistakes, others' advice, our own mistakes. We learn through all these sources wisdom. We gain wisdom through those sources. Although in the end, all of it comes from God. And the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But wisdom is also not just a commodity that we get, as a character that we have. And remember that the wise character allows us to have the inclination to listen, to receive humbly, so that we can get more wisdom. So it's a skill that enables us to get more of the skill. And we've talked about the motivation for wise living being many, in the sense that there are lots of things said about if you live wisely, you're going to have friends, you're going to be prosperous materially, you're going to have peace and security, you're going to not only have physical safety, long life, but also peace and joy and all those things. But really in the end, there's one main reward, which is not all those things that make life comfortable, but it is the knowledge of God is the key reward, the ultimate reward of wise living. And as we kind of make our way to the topic for this class, there are two paths described in Proverbs, two paths of living, the path of wisdom and the path of folly. Okay, so let's start by talking about that path of folly and what it looks like. And again, this is another key distinction in the book of Proverbs. What does Proverbs mean when it talks about folly? What does it mean when it talks about being the fool? Does it mean like being silly and always telling jokes? The book of Proverbs paints the fool in this way. He doesn't think highly of God's law. Okay, he despises the law of God, and more generally, you see in the second collection of verses here, he just doesn't like to be told what to do. So God's law he despises. He doesn't need it. Doesn't need God's instructions. But generally speaking, he doesn't want to listen to anybody or anything telling him what to do or how to do it. Right? Instead, the third collection, he trusts in his own opinion, always expresses his own thoughts. He's really good at that. He delights in that. And he goes by what he wants to do instead of what anybody is telling him. This is the character of the fool that we've been seeing in Proverbs. Maybe because of these things, he is short-sighted, or maybe in conjunction with these things, he's short-sighted. He cares more about the immediate pleasures, doesn't think about the consequences, and he doesn't like to work. Maybe those two things go together because, it's like at 6 a.m., the choice really at that point is keep sleeping or get up and work in the field. Well, the fool, in his short-sighted carnal mindset, says, better to keep sleeping. Doesn't consider the fact that the other choice might be better in the long run. And for those reasons, then, the fool is attracted to sin. He is enticed by either the gang of violent friends that is described in Proverbs, or he is drawn away by the adulterous woman or the forbidden woman, as the Proverbs describes. And in the ultimate, in the long run, we see, borrowing from the language of the Psalms, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. So this is the picture of the fool. And again, we want to be clear about it because it's going to be central to our discussion of raising children. What is folly in Proverbs? It is these things: rebellion, disobedience, disregard for authority, disrespect, not wanting to listen, stubbornness, a mindset that is about me, self-centered, selfish, lazy and careless, and those things tend to then breed or produce what we might call more obvious forms of sin or evil. And that person is cruel and is profane and dishonest because it flows from all of these other characteristics in which a person is all about themselves, doesn't care about others, doesn't want to be told what to do, and is naturally rebellious. Or I should say, inclination is to be rebellious in that way. Okay, so that's the fool. Let's read a little bit. We have done this some in our class, and typically at the end of our session. But let's do this at the beginning. Just read a passage here and use that as an opportunity to soak in the language that's being used in the book of Proverbs. We will refer to some specific items in what we're reading here in chapter 4, but it's a way to kind of set the stage for what we're going to be talking about. Specifically, be looking for the language of fathers and sons, mothers and sons, parents and children, and what the picture is in Proverbs of how a parent goes about raising their child, what that looks like, what they're trying to accomplish, and what the proper response from the children should be. Okay, we're going to read Proverbs 4. There'll be two slides here, 1 to 9 and then 10 to 17. 10 to 19, sorry. Proverbs 4, beginning in verse 1. Listen, my sons, to a father's instruction. Pay attention and gain understanding. I give you sound learning, so do not forsake my teaching. For I too was a son to my father, still tender and cherished by my mother. Then he taught me, and he said to me, take hold of my words with all your heart. Keep my commands, and you will live. Get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forget my words, or turn away from them. Do not forsake wisdom, and she will protect you. Love her, and she will watch over you. The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom. Though it cost all you have, get understanding. Cherish her, and she will embrace you. Exalt you, sorry. Embrace her, and she will honor you. She will give you a garland to grace your head and present you with a glorious crown. Verse 10 of Proverbs 4. Listen, my son, accept what I say, and the years of your life will be many. I instruct you in the way of wisdom and lead you along straight paths. When you walk, your steps will not be hampered. When you run, you will not stumble. Hold on to instruction. Do not let it go. Guard it well, for it is your life. Do not set foot on the path of the wicked, or walk in the way of the evildoers. Avoid it. Do not travel on it. Turn from it and go on your way, for they cannot rest until they do evil. They are robbed of sleep till they make someone stumble. They eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. The path of the righteous is like the morning sun, shining ever brighter till the full light of day. But the way of the wicked is like deep darkness. They do not know what makes them stumble. Okay, we talked about those last two verses in a previous class, the power of what that says about these two paths and where they go. But we see that they're in the context of a larger discussion and exhortation directed from a father to his son. So let's think about these ideas and what it says about parenting and the roles, responsibilities of fathers and mothers, as well as for children. This is, at least chapter 4, 1-9, is the first verse on your handout, which is available on our website. You can even just pause it, go to bellairchurchofchrist.org, look at Bible class material under media, pull this up, and these are going to roughly be in order following that handout. But the question is, what is the primary activity mentioned in connection with parenthood? And also gives you this verse. What does it look like? What does it mean to be a parent? What do parents do? Chapter 1, verse 8, listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. And we saw that in the passage in Proverbs 4, right? I give you sound teaching. Hear the instruction of a father. Give attention that you may gain understanding. Do not abandon my instruction, okay? And the father in Proverbs 4, interestingly, is even calling back to his own experience as a son and says, my father taught me these instructions, these commandments, and now I'm teaching you, I'm instructing you in the same way. That's what parents do. They instruct, they teach, they train, okay? For what purpose? Proverbs 6, 20-23. What is the goal of this instruction, this training? My son, keep your father's command and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Bind them always on your heart. Fasten them around your neck. When you walk, they will guide you. When you sleep, they will watch over you. When you awake, they will speak to you. For this command is a lamp. This teaching is a light. And correction, instruction are the way to life. Okay, let's put this together with what we saw in the previous lesson, what we've seen in other lessons, that Proverbs is picturing two paths, two ways of living, and one of them is full of blessedness, and it is full, and it is joyous, and it leads to more and more light, more and more life, while the other is a way of darkness and stumbling and pain, ultimately death. And so parents, their goal in their instruction and their training of their child is to put them on this path, and specifically to put them on this way to life that Proverbs 6 describes. That's why in this specific passage, the father is so, and mother are so insistent on hold on to these, bind these teachings, these commands, always have them with you when you walk out, when you go to sleep, when you wake up. Let these things guide you because it's going to put you on the path of life. And that's what the maybe most famous parenting verse in Proverbs is all about. Train a child in the way he should go. When he is old, he will not turn from it. And I think if you put these two verses together, you see that when the Proverbs says in 22:6, train a child in the way he should go, it's not simply saying, not only saying that, okay, there's right and there's wrong, make sure he does right. In the greater picture of Proverbs, it's saying there is a good way, there is a good life. It is the path of God's wisdom. It is the path to fullness. That's the way that we want our children to be in. That's the way we want our children to walk in. But we have to train them that direction. We have to guide them that direction. We have to instruct them in that direction. And if we do that, then generally speaking, and again, we'll remember that Proverbs are not guarantees about if you do this 100% of the time, this will result. But the general rule is that they'll stay with it. They'll stay on that path. My dad has used the metaphor in the past of a gun and a bullet coming through the barrel of a gun, and that bullet going through the barrel is like the time that you're raising your children, right? You're guiding them, you're directing them, and then that bullet leaves the barrel, and there it goes. But if and I don't know how far you want to take the analogy, right? Maybe a long barrel like a sniper rifle is super accurate, or maybe it's more tightly spun, and that bullet spins fast and is accurate and stays on its mark. I don't know what you want to say about that, but it's a picture of controlling, of guiding, of directing, so that when the child leaves and goes off, you can be confident about the direction and the accuracy of their trajectory in life. Okay, but maybe not to us. Maybe it is to us as well. But I would imagine to many people that seems a little bit, harsh or unnecessary, right? To say we have to be so tightly controlling of our children, and there is a popular notion, I guess, about giving your children the freedom to do, find their own expression and to find their own way in life. And that's somehow better than the picture we've just painted from Proverbs 22:6. But let's notice a couple statements in Proverbs that would maybe answer that. 29:15, the rod of correction imparts wisdom, but a child left to himself disgraces his mother. So the proverb seems to be saying that if you just leave it up to the child, well, that's going to end badly, not only for him, but for you as well. And then there are other verses that we have here about the necessity of this kind of discipline and training, as well as the benefit of learning and gaining knowledge that comes from it. But really, this passage here, this specific proverb in 22:15, I think gets at the heart of it. Folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will drive it far from him. Okay, what is this verse saying? Folly is bound up in the heart of a child. That's the natural state. That's the starting point. Okay, and remember what Proverbs means by folly, and go back to what we have already said. And this is not a statement about kids having guilt with them all along. That's not what Proverbs is talking about. Proverbs is talking about what we've seen. This idea of selfishness, wanting to do it your own way, not wanting to listen, rejecting instruction. Okay, these are the type of things that's folly. That's what is inherently in a child. And I guess I can't yet speak from personal experience with my own, but I think we see that in little kids, sometimes even very young, and you see that willfulness, you see that wanting to do it themselves, self-will. And Proverbs says that's what's there, but through discipline, you drive the folly from them. And that's at least the beginning of the process of training them in the way that they should go. So is it necessary? Well, yes, training is necessary. You leave a kid to himself to figure it out on their own. Well, folly is bound up in the heart of a child, and that's going to lead them to disastrous ends, and you have to direct them, put them on that good path for their own benefit. And that's where we're going with this in just a second. Notice, though, that just the rebuke, just the discipline in the way we think of it, maybe with the corporal punishment, or even just the rebuke verbally, whichever way you take that, notice that these two proverbs in 17:10 and 15:5 indicate that there's more needed than just that, okay? Because a fool, someone with that character, they could receive lash after lash after lash 100 times, but it might not make any difference. So there's a character adjustment that needs to happen to complete the training process. It's not just about the rebuke in that way, okay? So what is it about? How do we fill out this picture? Well, one of the ways we fill this picture out is by talking about the motivation for the correction. Is it just about the mechanics of the SWAT or the discipline or the rebuke? No, it's about the motivation behind it. So you notice in chapter 3, comparing the discipline of the Lord to the discipline that fathers give their children, it says that the Lord disciplines those whom he loves. As the Father, the Son, he delights in, right? So discipline comes from love. Chapter 13, verse 24 goes so far as to say, if you don't discipline, you spare the rod, then you hate your child. Okay, well, how does that work? If you love him, you'll be careful to discipline him. Well, it goes back to what we said about the pathway. You really want them to be on that good path of blessedness and life and fullness and joy and all those things and the fear of the Lord, the knowledge of God. You want that beautiful life for your child because you love them. And so you're directing them in that way. You're training them in that way. You're disciplining them in that direction. If you don't do that, well, then you must not want the best thing for your child. Chapter 23, 13 and 14. Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you punish him with the rod, he will not die. Punish him with the rod and save his soul from death. Again, there are consequences that we are helping them to avoid in one direction and a blessed life that we are helping them to fulfill in the other direction. So that's the real motivation. So we could put all this together into a process that we begin by driving out the folly from children. Remember, that's that stubbornness, that rebelliousness, that self-will, that infatuation with themselves and their own opinions and their own desires. Okay, all of that we talked about is folly. We start by driving that out with discipline, with the rod. Okay, and then you fill in from there and you supply what is needed for true growth and true maturity. So 4, 20, and 21, pay attention to what I say, listen closely to my words, do not let them out of your sight, keep them within your heart. 23, 19, listen, my son, and be wise, keep your heart on the right path. So we drive out folly, but then we give words, we give instruction, we replace that folly with wisdom, and we do it in a way that goes into their heart. And so we're going beyond the simply don't do this, don't do that, and even beyond this is what you should do, but we're training in a way that will get these messages into their heart. It's maybe because it's consistent or it's sincere or it's genuine or it matches our example and it comes from a place of affection and love, but it's going into their hearts so that they get to this point. 23, 22, and following. Listen to your father, buy the truth and do not sell it. Get wisdom, get discipline and understanding. We're training them to take on this lifestyle of gaining wisdom, of trying to learn, of looking for more understanding, so that they will be the kind of person that wants help, wants to be better, and is willing even to hear rebuke. And so, in some ways, is like this spiral upward, okay, this circular motion higher and higher, where we're correcting them, driving out folly, replacing that with good words of wisdom from God's instruction. We're getting that to sink into their heart so that they will be the kind of person that will listen when they are told not only what to do but what not to do, so that they can continue to drive out folly and grow more and more in more and more maturity. Okay. And that's going back to the text that we read earlier. That's what those verses were describing. Take hold of my words with all your heart. Keep my commandments and you will live. Okay, in the fullest sense of that. Get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forget my words. Do not forsake wisdom. The beginning of wisdom is to get wisdom. So again, if wisdom itself is a skill that helps us to get more of the skill of living well, then in training our children, we are trying to do just that. We're trying to train them to be the kind of people that will value wisdom, that will seek after it, and that will learn and grow in the fear of the Lord. All right. And the blessings of that are probably pretty self-evident, but there is a picture of peace and delight, and we'll come back to something like this at the end, but we see the blessings listed in these two verses of Proverbs. Hope, peace, delight for your soul will be the result of this difficult work of raising children in the fear of the Lord and in wisdom. And I'll just give a brief example of this just for fun. I was talking to somebody recently who was saying that they had taken their kids on a family vacation, and they made the comment that they felt like, for the first time, maybe, they noticed that they were enjoying the vacation. Their kids were, happy and cooperative and adding to the enjoyment of the experience. Okay, whereas maybe in the past, the training and the caring for the kids was a burden that was limiting the enjoyment. They were saying that, man, the kids were great and it was just a wonderful experience. And I know from knowing this person that he and his wife have been very diligent about the training process from very young. And what I told him is that I think that's the fruit. And that's maybe what Proverbs is describing, that you go through the process of the diligent, difficult, consistent, tedious training and discipline and instruction of your kids when they're very, very young. And then that pays off. And Proverbs is showing us that. Those kids, by the way, are 7, 5, and 3. So I'm not, or 7, 4, and 3, whatever they are now. But so I'm not talking about like teenagers. I mean, this is work that I think you put in very early, and if you do it well, I think the fruit can even show itself very early and then continue to multiply as time goes on. Okay, I will show you this. I'm a little bit cognizant of our time. This is something a little bit separate from the Proverbs itself, but I think it's valuable, and so I'll just run through this pretty quickly, and I think you'll see how it's rooted in the principles of the Proverbs. But when we're thinking about punishment, which is only one side of discipline, as we'll say in just a second, but punishment is a aspect of discipline. Here's how I think we should think of it: that punishment of our children should be for folly in the ways that we've talked about it, okay, and not for these things. Think about these things and how these ought not to be the reasons for punishment of our children. They had an accident, they were clumsy, right? They spilled the milk because they just don't have quite the hand control to put it back on the table. It should not be a reason for discipline, for punishment. We shouldn't punish just something because of us. We want to show off to other people, show how tough we are as parents, or because we're hurt in some way, or because we're embarrassed because we're in public and the kid is doing X, Y, or Z, and or maybe as it can be typical, we're just fed up, right? And so all these little things, just bothersome things, get to the point where we have an explosion, and that's when the punishment is issued. Okay, or just to say, I need to show them that if this can't keep going that direction, so I'll give them a good spank, and then that'll settle things down. That's not, I think, what punishment should be about. It should be very clear that there is a personal guilt, that this is not about the situation we're in. This is not about circumstances. This is about you have, broken a rule. You have incurred guilt for whatever reason, and you're responsible for that. You're going to receive a punishment for that. It should be consistent and certain. I mean, that instead of just threatening a bunch of things and then sometimes following through, not threatening, not saying it unless it's going to be carried out, and connected in time to the infraction itself, so that it's clear that that's the result of the action. Okay. It's going to have to hurt in some way. I think that's the idea. Hebrews 12 talks about the Lord's discipline. It's painful for the moment. It's got to be. That's the way we learn, is through pain. of some sort. And it should then, once it's carried out, be over, moved past. Remember Hebrews 12, it's painful for the moment, for the present, but afterward it bears fruit, and it should go on and be consistent and continual. And then I'll just say that alongside this, we should remember that praise is just as critical, if not more critical, than the punishment. And that as we are disciplining on the side of, don't do this, and we're giving a rebuke or the rod for folly, that when we see wisdom, when we see them walking down that way of wisdom, of humility, of learning, of helpfulness, of selflessness, of kindness, of goodness, we should praise them for that and say, yes, that's exactly what we want. That's wonderful. And focus on what we are praising them for. Instead of always saying, I'm so proud of you because you're such a great football player. Say, I'm proud of you because you work hard. I'm proud of you because you're kind to your siblings, or you're helpful to other people. And this idea of celebrating and extending the love and the warmth for positive things goes back to what we said about the discipline happens, and then immediately there is this show of affection and forgiveness to reinforce what it is that we're trying to get for our children, that good life that we're trying to train them towards. Okay. So you can make a little bit of a checklist, and again, I'll offer this to you, and I will, between now and when this premieres, I will put all this on the website so that the audio item has this PowerPoint. You can check back with it. Maybe here's some things to think about as we discipline our children with corporal punishment. Is there a rule that is clear? So has it been laid out that whatever they did or they're going to do is wrong and it's unacceptable? Okay, that has to be clear up front. Is it known, understood by the child? Could they even say, this isn't allowed, or I'm not supposed to do this? Are they clear on it? And is it clear what the punishment is going to be if that infraction occurs? So is all that ahead of time clear, understandable, and known by the child himself or herself? Okay. Then the infraction itself, is it a clear violation of whatever was put in place? Okay, that's that idea of folly. Is it really folly? Have they really violated something or infringed on something that was clearly ahead of time stated and known as being wrong by a rule of some sort? Or is it this kind of evidence of other types of folly we mentioned? Rebellion, laziness, disrespect, that sort of thing. Okay, so what category is the infraction? Is it just because it's they spilled the milk, or is it because it truly is folly? And then we need to be checking ourselves to say, okay, am I calm about this, or am I just acting out in some sort of anger or temper? And then before the punishment, I think these things are critically necessary in terms of going over with the child before the discipline, before the punishment, I should say, what they did, why that was wrong, what the consequence is supposed to be, so that it's clear why this is happening. It's not just a flying off the handle and there you go, whack. Okay, no, but it's clear that I'm expressing not only why this has to happen, but the fact that I'm doing it because of love, and I'm doing it because it's my responsibility, and I want them to be trained and instructed in the good way to obey God and to live for Him. And I'm expressing that I have to do this, and that I'm confident in their behavior going forward. And then once the punishment is issued, that obviously is painful for the moment, again, the language of Hebrews 12, but immediately am I expressing that I love them and that they are forgiven and that I'm ready to receive them literally with open arms and with warmth. And I can tell you, having not been on that side of it yet, I guess, but having gone through it as a child, I can still vividly remember, maybe more than the spanks themselves, I can remember the tearful hugs afterward in which love was expressed, and there was that warmth and affection that made it very clear to me in that moment, even if I couldn't articulate it, that anything that was painful about that experience was because of the love that my parents had for me. So this is kinds of things we should be thinking about. And the reason we're talking about this is because in Proverbs, the goal of parents is to instruct, to train, to remove the folly from the children and to put them on a path of obedience, of wisdom, of developing the kind of character that will allow them to live the good life that God has designed. And so, as we get to the backside of our handout, we'll try to just run through this quickly. We want to understand that the child's responsibility then is to listen, to not despise, to not look down on the instruction that they've received, but to listen to what their parents have to say. And you can think about, for those of us maybe that are grown, looking back on our childhood and the things that our parents tried to instill, or as we are thinking about our own children and testing how they're doing in terms of their maturity. We have all these things we've talked about with folly. And you could draw a straight line to, well, what does wisdom look like then? Okay, if folly is resisting authority, then wisdom takes that authority, internalizes it, and says, I have my own boundaries that I'm going to have and respect as a wise person. The wise person, instead of hating instruction, is open to correction. They seek advice. They respect the wisdom of others. And you could go on and on with this. And so, as a test, again, as children, as adults looking back, as currently maybe children, middle school, high school age, old enough to understand, what I'm saying here about looking at what is Proverbs describing in terms of what it means to be wise. Am I that? Have I developed that character in myself, and using this as a blueprint for our own children? And the effects of this are, I would think, obvious. So you can look through these verses on your own. But there is joy, there is gladness, there is delight that comes from the child gaining these maturities and living in this wisdom. And there is shame and grief and pain when a son or daughter continues in their folly and rejects the wisdom that we've tried to offer. Okay, and so a passage like Proverbs 17:6, children are a crown to the aged, and parents are the pride of their children. There's this mutual joy and affection that Proverbs describes, and you can see that in 23, 24, and through 26 as well, also on your handout, that in the ideal, when the parents have done what they can to train up their child in the way that he or she should go, and when the child has reciprocated that with respect, with love, with a willingness to listen and internalize their own maturity, then in the end, the parents look on their children and their grandchildren with gladness and with joy with how they have blessed them throughout their life. And children look at their parents with pride and with gladness and with joy and gratitude for the way that they have molded them and shaped them and benefited them now that they can see all of that clearly. That's what we are shooting for. That's what we're hoping for. And so, as we close up here, we have gone longer than we've tried to in the past, but I'll leave these questions up for a few minutes so that you can discuss them if you're with other people. But the first thing that you can discuss is, in all of this description of Proverbs and what a parent should be, where is God, or how do we see God in all of that? How is that a reflection of His character as our Heavenly Father? And then, how can we directly imitate God in the way that we are as parents? And then the second question would be, assuming many of us are watching this or hearing this, and we may not be right in the thick of the disciplining stages of our kids that are young or at home with us. So, if that's the case, how can we think about these principles and apply them to our kids who are maybe grown and not under our roof anymore, And then on the other side, how about older parents? I don't mean to say like old as in elderly. I just mean if you're an adult and your parents are still alive, and how do you apply these principles of the responsibilities of children in that different relationship? Okay, we've already gone too long. I will leave these up and go mute for about 5 minutes before the video ends, and you have a chance to discuss these. But class is over, and I appreciate your patience and your good attention during this class. Thank you so much.